dream of London City Airport has turned sour. Its owners say it needs to expand or it could be doomed, but a group of protesters hope to stop it forever.
Transit 04 is cleared to Price Charles de Gaulle on hasty 1 uniform departure to Squawk 05 at 17.
Charles de Gaulle, hasty 1 uniform departure 0517, Squawk, no star 004.
London City Airport, the solution to an international businessman's problem. 6 miles from the city, counterparts in Paris, Amsterdam and Brussels are little more than an hour away, door to door. But in spite of this high-flying glamour, not everyone is a fan of the airport.
You get their dirt and dust, their fumes. We get nothing but aggro, and when they're taxiing there, and weekends, they'll tell you they don't land other planes. Now, they landed some the other Sunday. When we went down there, they made out that we didn't know what we were on about. We're sitting there watching them, listening to them. I mean, in them houses down there, some weekends we can't sit in our back gardens because the noise drives you mad.
It is possible that this airport might not survive without the Whisper jet.
I wouldn't put it any more strongly than that. It is possible, but we are not prejudging that issue until we have got to that point and we know what the economic climate is and so many other factors which will come into play, which we can't foresee now.
London City Airport is in trouble. Originally conceived of as an airport to serve nearby European capitals, it must now expand and fly jets, or it could face closure. But a noisy group of local protesters is campaigning to block any use of jets. They say the airport has already ruined the quality of their lives and that larger planes would only make things worse. In 5 weeks' time, a public inquiry will decide whether or not to allow London City Airport to extend its runway and go ahead with its plans. Tonight in the London programme, we ask why the airport has failed to meet its aims and examine the David and Goliath battle between London City Airport and its neighbours. London City Airport was the idea of Sir Philip Beck, chairman of the Molem building firm and a keen amateur pilot. With 1992 round the corner, Sir Philip's target market was to be the business commuter travelling to the financial centres of Northern Europe. When the idea was born in 1981, it seemed that here was a venture which would underline London's position as the financial capital of the world and create jobs in the deprived Docklands. The first airport to be built in Britain for 40 years, it was funded with private capital. Because the area was surrounded by high-rise buildings, it was to be a stall port for short takeoff and landing propeller-driven aircraft.
Well, it was regarded as a milestone in aviation history. People have been advocating for the last 10, 15 years that such things should happen, but nobody had been able to make it happen before. There were no suitable sites in most cities.
In response to local fears and GLC pressure, a public inquiry was held. But Molem swayed the inspectors when they demonstrated that the plane they had in mind, a Dash 7 short takeoff and landing aircraft built by de Havilland of Canada, was no noisier than a car passing a window at 30 miles an hour. It also presented an opinion poll that showed over half the local people were in favour of the airport, with the rest evenly divided between being neutral and opposed. Molem got the go-ahead, but were restricted to 120 flights per day. The runway length was also restricted, thereby determining the type of plane which could use the airport. The airport opened to a fanfare of publicity in October 1987, but since then, a number of factors have conspired to thwart Molem's ambitions.
It's done less well than it expected. Essentially, the owners saw a period of 2 years in which they'd have to build up their business, but they saw themselves hitting the target throughput to break even after 3 years of operation, getting 400,000 passengers a year. In the event, as we know, they only achieved 100,000 passengers in their first year of operations, 200,000 in the second year, and now they're starting to build up to over 300,000.
Problems that Molem could never have foreseen struck damaging blows even before the airport's grand opening. First, the financial world suffered a crisis which was to reduce potential passenger numbers.
The week before the airport opened was Black Monday, in which the stock market crash occurred. I think that the airport itself has suffered from that. There isn't the amount of money around that there was. Interest rates have increased subsequently. So the airport's target market has not grown as they originally hoped.
4 weeks later, an air traffic control scare put a temporary halt on the busy Paris route. The boast that a businessman could reach the airport from the Bank of England in 20 minutes soon proved to be hollow. Roadworks, which it was hoped would improve links to the airport, have in fact snarled up traffic. Improvements to local transport links have taken longer than expected. The Docklands Light Railway will one day go within a few minutes' walk of the airport terminal, but it's unlikely to be completed until December 1992.
The surface access is not as good as it might be. The airport builds itself on its ability to be able to process the passenger very quickly, but the A13 is particularly congested, and access to the airport is taking people from the city 40 minutes or so, which is only slightly better than the time it takes to go to Heathrow.
Well, certainly the infrastructure in Docklands is a disaster. Essentially, it was an enterprise zone that went off half-cock. If you go to the La Défense in Paris, plenty of infrastructure, RER there. If you go to Docklands, you've got a toy town railway, basically.
The main problem is the lack of public transport. I mean, it's a 300 or 400 yard walk to a British rail station where the service has in the past been abysmal.
Well, I'm not flying back in until 8, so I'll miss all the traffic going back, because that's the only problem. Like this morning I had to leave quite a bit earlier purely to get through the Blackwall Tunnel.
The lack of awareness of the airport and poor access have damaged the competitive edge it should have over its rivals. And aviation experts believe it means businessmen prefer to travel from their homes in the suburbs to other airports.
I travel quite a lot. I use Gatwick because it's easier to go straight from home, straight into Gatwick, rather than go all the way into town to use London City. I think there are a few businessmen who actually live in the city who get up in the morning and say, I've got to go to Paris, therefore I'll use London City. I think they've got that problem. They take a lot of incoming traffic from, say, Paris, for instance, who come straight into the city and can go straight from City Airport into town, do their business, straight back out again, no hassles. It's great for that. But as for the British businessmen, I think a lot of people tend to do what I do and use Heathrow and Gatwick because they live out of town.
Airports make money by charging airlines a fee per passenger and per landing, so low passenger figures mean low profits. A reflection of this was Molem's announcement earlier this year that they had written off £3.5 million of their own profits. And in March this year, London City Airlines, which operates from the airport, closed its Amsterdam route and shed 40 jobs. But perhaps the biggest blow was the unexpected news that the Dash 7 would cease production. Small enough for airports with limited space, yet big enough to carry a profitable passenger load, the airport was designed around the Dash 7.
Well, shortly after the airport opened, de Havilland of Canada, who manufacture the Dash 7, announced that they were no longer going to produce it. That means that the airport does not have a long-term future in terms of the aircraft that can be operated there at the moment. The Dash 7 will be flying around for the next 15, 20 years. There's no problem, at least up until the year 2010. But long-term, permission has to be granted for other aircraft types to use the airport.
Molam saw the Dash 7 as a long-term prospect. They were shocked to discover it would cease production and therefore could only be regarded as a short-term proposition for the airport.
There is no possible way in which we can know the decision process of an aircraft manufacturer in America. The company that had been building the Dash 7 was effectively sold and acquired by Boeing, who have their own particular plans.
Molam are keen to point out the long-term nature of their investment, but the end of the Dash 7 would seem to threaten the airport's future.
We have never said, and nobody should have expected, that a project like this would be instantaneously viable. No worthwhile major investment can ever be in the first 2 or 3 years. You have only to look at Gatwick as the classic example of that, which was still by some people deemed to be a white elephant after about 5 years. So we're doing nicely. We're not yet profitable, and we make no bones about that.
The airport's reached a difficult stage. It had hoped to offer more jobs, but already 40 have been lost. It was granted 120 flights a day, but uses just about 50. It had hoped to attract 500,000 passengers this year, but it's on course for only 300,000. In the short term, the difficulties of access by road and rail mean that Molam must continue to underwrite losses. In the long term, that is within 15 years or so, the lifespan of the Dash 7, a successor aircraft must be found. The British Aerospace 146 jet is seen as the solution to both of these problems. The British Aerospace 146, the so-called Whisper jet, is the plane Molam favours to solve its problems. It has double the flying range and double the seating capacity.
With the 146, we can reach places like Lisbon and Madrid and Milan, Vienna, Warsaw, Stockholm, that sort of range. So all of Europe is brought within the range of London City Airport, and we believe that's the kind of thing that we should be looking for as a future for this airport. Because we'll be able to offer our passengers exactly the same benefits. 10-minute check-in, fast arrival, and an airport with no stress, but to many more destinations in Europe. That'll make the place inevitably much more successful.
2 years ago, the airport staged a landing of the British Aerospace 146 to demonstrate to local people that the Whisper jet lived up to its name. But to land and take off safely with a full payload, the jet needs an extra 169 metres of runway. And it's that which has caused a second public inquiry. Jointly held by the Department of Transport and Environment, it's due to start on July the 6th and will consider Molam's application. The inquiry is legally obliged to weigh the airport's needs against the feelings of the local community. Although they're in the minority, the protesters believe that they have evidence which will sway the inspectors and get the application vetoed. The inquiry will consider the effect of the airport's expansion on factors like noise, future planning, safety, and character of the area. It'll hear evidence from local people and businesses. Just as Molam made a mistake in choosing the Dash 7, protesters believe jets may not be the right choice for the airport or the area. Their two main objections are on the grounds of noise and safety.
I mean, everybody's on about noise. They don't see the other aggro, or early morning taxiing and practising weekends of them planes where you've got to get up. Where we are now is very quiet. But when a plane's in and out and you're about a mile down that road near that terminal, it's absolutely deafening.
The protesters claim a large groundswell of support. They've been doing their research on aviation since the first public inquiry. They believe the angle at which the jets would land and take off, known as the glide slope factor, would be dangerous to both passengers and those living beneath the flight path. The glide slope is the angle between the ground and the airplane's flight path. The Dash 7 lands and takes off at a steep angle of 7.5 degrees. The British Aerospace 146 jet would land and take off on a lesser angle of 5.5 degrees. But protesters believe the jets are not built to fly at this angle and would pass dangerously close to buildings.
When you come to a 5.5 degree coming in at that angle, it's not very good either for the passenger or for the people on the ground, because then they've got to slew up like that, and that's exactly what these planes do. And I mean, these planes here, they're coming in at a 7.5 degree slope. If you take an angle like that, it surely is very hairy to be able to sit in a plane and coming down. It's like being on the back of a switchback, really. The BA 146 is going to come on a 5.5 degree slope, which is not a very good angle for any jet to come in at all. Because it's never been practiced anywhere, never been practiced. We had one demonstration of an empty plane. So, I mean, I think myself that is a very big safety hazard.
Protesters also say the jets could be dangerously disabled if a bird is sucked into the engines.
Yes, there's a possibility of a bird strike being more prevalent if the jets come in. Here I would have said that the danger was worse because the whole area is surrounded by water and there's lots of waterfowl about. And I mean, you will see ducks coming in droves, not necessarily landing here, but they do come in to go over to the reservoirs. And there is the definite possibility of a bird strike. And if that gets ingested into one engine of the jet, that leaves one engine to fly on.
Technical observations like these have to be taken seriously, and despite the protesters' lack of numbers, they could count heavily against the airport's application. But the London programme has found that there are serious flaws in their arguments. While most large planes like jumbos fly in at a glide slope factor of 3 degrees, the 146 manual advises pilots the aircraft can cope perfectly well on the steeper slope of 6 degrees. This is endorsed by the Civil Aviation Authority, the arbiter of aviation safety standards. Also, recently, the Swiss airline Crossair did a test flight into Lugano in Switzerland, with a 146 using a 6.5 degree glide slope.
They don't know what they're talking about. It's perfectly safe. They operate, Danair operate into Innsbruck using a 4.5 degree glide slope. London City, they'll only need a 5.5 degree glide slope. It's been certificated in instrument and visual conditions by the Civil Aviation Authority up to 6 degrees. It's perfectly safe. Most aeroplanes come down at a 3 degree glide path. The 146 has been certificated up to 6 degrees, but it's still slow. It's like, if you like, going downhill on a bike. You put the brakes on, so you're not going any faster the steeper the hill.
On the question of the 146's noise levels, tests show that the Dash 7 has a taxiing level of 72 decibels, while the British Aerospace 146 taxis at 66 decibels. On takeoff, while the Dash 7 has a sound level of 75 decibels, the 146 is 85 decibels. Overhead, both planes register 70 decibels. On landing, both planes register 80 decibels. What this means is that only on takeoff is the 146 noisier. With a maximum sound level of 85 decibels, experts liken the level to hearing average traffic from the curbside. At the John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California, acknowledged by many experts as having some of the most stringent noise controls in the world, the 146 has been passed for takeoff and landing. In Manchester Airport, the authorities there do not include the 146 in its strictly limited night flying quota, because its sound is considered negligible.
Well, the 146 is a very quiet aeroplane. It's been accepted in a number of airports around the world as being the quietest in its class. In the United States, Manchester has voted to leave it out of its night quota of airplanes because it's so quiet.
The possibility of an engine ingesting a bird during takeoff and landing is no more likely at city airports than any other. The CAA estimates the incidence of accident due to bird strike as a probability factor of 33,000 to 1. At the city airport, they're required by law to employ bird scaring measures around the runway.
I think what they're talking about is ingestion of a bird into an engine. This aircraft has got 4 engines. It's got 4-engine safety. Again, it's certificated to accept birds up to a certain strength. And after all, the birds don't know the difference between one aeroplane and another. The bird strike problem is there for the propeller-driven aeroplanes also.
People in this area have lived with noise and pollution all their lives. Busy docks once stood on this site, and most people here agree that they were far noisier than the airport is. A recent Maury poll taken after the Whisperjet tests lent weight to this view. It showed that almost half the local people were in favour of the jet and support the airport. Less than a third regard it unfavourably. Now, European trade barriers come down in 1992, and the whole of London could benefit if this airport thrives. Not unnaturally, though, it will be local views that may weigh most heavily with the inquiry. The nearby London borough of Redbridge, 10 minutes by road, is poised to take advantage of the economic spin-off from the introduction of jets. They want European businessmen using the airport to set up offices and factories in the borough, and have produced a video showing their links with it.
Access to airports
in the future, they hope businesses may relocate from other areas so they can be close to the airport. They believe this could help create up to 3,000 new jobs.
Opening up the exciting prospect of direct flights, city centre to city centre. Many employers in central London...
Local supporters of the airport say this will not be at the cost of their quality of life.
I mean, those people that are against the airport, I respect their views, but they are in the minority, and local protesters are in very, very short supply.
When the docks were in full swing, they were certainly noisy. There were noisy cranes, ships hooting in the early hours of the morning as they sailed on the night tide. Ship repairing with riveters working at Howland and Wolff. There was plenty of noise. The difference was that all the people here were involved in it. And the sad thing here at the moment is that we've got this 17% unemployment, and not sufficient people are employed in this new industry.
I didn't think that it would get off the ground, but as the area was so derelict and we really needed something to boost the area up, I honestly thought that it would be a good opportunity for people.
I suppose we could all sit back and say, you know, well, that's it. But when you look around and you see that there are 7 out of 10 kids can't get a job and all the rest of it, I mean, that's the kind of things you've got to start looking at. And there is nobody looking here. There's no one going to come here with a magic wand to get things going.
If you look at what the airport provides at the moment, it provides jobs, it provides a new industry, it provides a capability for Docklands and the Docklands community and the City of London to develop, and it adds an extra dimension to London and everything concerned with London into Europe. All of that could possibly disappear if the airport didn't develop. But for us, as I've said before, the logic of what we're asking for, and really it isn't that much, is so absolute, so straightforward, so caring about the community and everything else, that we don't see this application being turned down.
We haven't got a lot of resources, but we've got some. I mean, we'll manage. I think the truth and people, the hearts of the people, carries a lot more weight than all their money. You don't need money to get up on that stand and tell the truth.
While the public inquiry looks set to last at least 6 months, the airport will have to continue trying to attract passengers. In the meantime, it'll need to brace itself well for some turbulence ahead.